Oh man, it's getting exciting! Alright, today's activity, we are attaching clay to clay. It's actually a little more involved than it may seem on the outside. Most of the people that take a piece of clay, a nice fresh piece of clay like this, what happens is they stick it together, and what do you know? It sticks together, right? But once it dries up, I can almost guarantee you it will fall apart. Why? Because it's not actually gripping together, it's just kind of butting up against itself. Okay? And as clay dries, it shrinks slightly, and as it shrinks, it pulls away from itself. And that bond, which you thought was so strong, will just come apart. Okay? And this doesn't even have to be fired for it to come apart. It will come apart long before it even gets bone dry. Okay? So today's lesson is all about attaching clay properly. For this lesson, we're going to return to the first thing we did the other day is taking that dried up clay, right? The piece of clay that we let out, sit in the sun, let get dried up, okay? And so what I want you to do with that is pulverize it, okay? You can pulverize it, you can take, maybe a fork or something. You can take a hammer, but you see as I pulverize it, make it a powder. Try not to inhale it. Don't snort it, that's even worse. But you want to make a nice fine powder. The reason why is because just like baking, you're kind of making a dough, or like icing. If you've ever made a gingerbread house, you use icing to basically glue it together. So here I have this nice fine powder. All right? I'm going to put it in a bucket. You probably need more than this, right? And then add a little bit of water. Boop. Very little bit, because what happens is it doesn't take a lot of water to basically make it a paste. Now, just like every great cooking show, I'm going to pretend I stir that all up, and then I get beautiful, wonderful slip. And that's a bit what the brush is for. Notice it's about the consistency of whipping cream. This one's a little bit thick, maybe a little too thick. The idea here is that you want basically water with clay particles in it. Water, clay particles. Okay? You are going to be using this to help attach elements together in clay. Okay? So, grab the piece that you did the other day. I'm assuming it was wrapped. What you might find is that after a day or two, or even a weekend, that piece starts to become a little bit firm. That's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, because it becomes more stable that way. Okay? The idea here is we are going to learn just to attach separate elements onto this piece. Okay? I'm not really concerned what it is right now, and you can make a teacup if you want or something, but it doesn't matter. What I'm going to actually do in this particular case is I'm going to put it on its, make a dome out of it. And then this way I can attach pieces onto it just for demonstration purposes. Okay? So what we need is we need a piece to attach to it. Let's grab some clay. Maybe I'll just take that piece. Now, as far as hand building is concerned, you can shape it with your hand, right? You can maybe even roll it out, or you can, here's another little, going kind of ahead. If you make basically what's called a slab, and I'm pounding it a little bit, which actually is helping with that wedging process a little bit. You can take, your tool that I gave you, maybe something that cuts it, and you can actually cut a design in it. All right, you can cut the design. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. It's like a cookie cutter type thing. Oh heck, you can even use cookie cutters. Right? These little scraps are really nice because you can let them dry up and make more slip. But now, here's my plan. Here's my artistic intent. I'm going to give this cup a fin. Right? Now by itself, right now, it just looks like I took a slab of clay and I cut it, because that's what I did. So here's where we start talking about craft. Okay? By itself, it serves the need. Right? It's a fin, but it's sloppy. Okay? So I am going to want to clean up the edges, maybe give it a little bit of a bevel. I'm not going to go too crazy with it because this is just a demonstration, but that's the idea of sculpting, okay, is that you nitpick every little detail. I am going to give this a bit of a kind of a little fin. I am going for a shark fin thing, okay? But the piece that I'm going to attach it, I'm not doing too much because of what this lesson is all about. Okay? Let's look at the board here. Hand building, adding elements. Okay? We need some slip to do this. So to make slip, we powder the clay and add some water. Voila! Okay. I'm at step 2. I'm creating the element to, it doesn't say a hatch, it's attached just with the 2 crossed T's. Here's where time and comes into play. Okay? Ideally, and this is why being in a studio class sometimes is beneficial, because we can take a little more time. And I know with this format, it just seems like we are rushing everything. Ideally, I want to let this stiffen up a bit. Okay? I can work with it a bit. I can, let it get a little bit hard, but it's a thin piece. It's a thin little piece. And if I am too rough with it, it could bend and break. Okay? So ideally, I would like to let it stiffen a bit, because you might have noticed that the cup was a little bit stiff from just storing it overnight. Doesn't really matter because you can still do the process. Okay? So our next thing here is to score. I'll get to the fork and slip. Okay? So here's my plan. Attaching the fin, I don't know, there. Let's do this. Let's do complex. Okay? This is going to be my attachment point. Okay? Now here's the thing. If I just put it on there, yes, it sticks. Most people will say, yay, I'm done. Guaranteed it will just fall off really quickly. Okay? So your goal here is to score and slip. So what I mean by scoring is to rough up the edge, to roughen it up. So let's just say here's where it's going to be, right? I could use something like a point if you have one of these tools, but I like to use the fork. Okay? Now the fork is an interesting little tool because most people have them and it's very easy to use. And there's this great story about Rolly Crump, who was a Disney Imagineer back before Disneyland opened, and he was assigned to sculpt the tiki gods out in the little area, the little waiting area. And he was wondering, oh, how am I going to make it look like a wood texture? And usually I talk about this with with texture, but what he did is he went out to the commissary and he found a little plastic fork, and he found that by scraping it into the surface of the clay, he was able to make a great wood grain. So the point is that the tools that we use, they don't have to be fancy store-bought ones. They can be, just stuff you have laying around the house, like a fork. All right, so I am going to score both sides. When I say both sides, I mean the attachment point and then the other attachment point. Now I'm being somewhat aggressive with this. What I mean by aggressive is I am disrupting the surface quite a bit. Okay. Here's the goal. Here's the goal. I want the clay to grab onto itself. I want this to happen. Okay. I want the clay to be scored, so kind of broken apart, and then when I push it together, it creates a bond. Okay. Can't get it up. Can't get it loose, right? Okay. If I don't do that, it doesn't really work, right? It doesn't actually stick together. Even with, slip, it might, but most likely after it dries, it'll fall apart. So scoring breaks the surface open, okay? And then I'm going to add a little slip. I'm going to go ahead and just use my finger, because if you don't have a brush, you don't have a brush. Put slip on it. Doesn't take much. The clay is already pretty wet. Okay. I usually like to let it sit for a minute or two. Now, this is a small piece. A small piece doesn't require a tremendous amount of scoring, a tremendous amount of slipping. Guarantee you, if you look at some of the other videos I've done, especially on how to cut apart a portrait bust and put it back together, you're talking about a life-size element. If you want to know how to score and slip, watch that video. Okay, I might even link it. Okay. So I'm going to score it a bit more, just for good practice. If you have a brush, dab it in. I always get the question, how much do you use? I don't know, try it out. It doesn't take much. Okay? So here's the magic. Watch this, let's make sure. Dun, dun, dun. Swoosh. Squish. Okay. So what is happening here? What is happening here is I am attaching the pieces together, and I am making sure that the clay is basically bonding to itself. Really tough, okay? But what it also does is it makes kind of a mess. It makes a bit of a mess around the side here. So our final step, after pressing it together, is to clean up the joining area. That's part of the craft. That's a good time to use the wood tools. I like using wood tools for that. Some people use their fingers, okay? But check this out. If I'm using the wood tool, okay, then I can clean up that edge, I can maybe press the clay together just a bit. And through practice, you'll figure this out. Okay? But I'm gonna use the tool, take some of the excess clay, I'm going to clean up that seam line. All the while, I might be reinforcing that edge, and by kind of pressing it here and there. Going to do the other side. Now I do want to make the point that while attaching this piece, I might be disrupting the surface of other parts. That's okay, because one of the major things about sculpting is cleaning up, refining, reworking. You know, it's not the type of thing where once you put the piece on and it kind of serves the purpose, it's done. I don't want you to think that. I want you to think of it as just the midpoint. Okay? So I'm going to clean up that edge a bit. I'm going to go a little bit quicker for you. But the idea here, for the sake of this lesson, is understanding how to attach a piece onto another piece. Right? Give a little bit of a close-up here. Right? And as the clay gets a little bit stiffer, okay, then you can treat it differently. Like, I might not finish this today. I actually, it's not a good idea to finish it because I want to be able to exploit the stages of the clay. When I say that is, I might want it to become a little bit stiffer because stiffer leather hard clay is actually easier to carve into and to kind of give a finish effect, right? So I might just leave it at that point for now. Okay. Now you can attach as much as you want to this piece, right? It doesn't really matter what you attach onto it. The point I want to make is that each time you attach a piece, you should offer the same amount of time and energy in whatever you put on there. Because if you don't put in that time and energy, then the pieces are just going to fall off. Okay? So you can add on to this, you can have this tiny little piece grow into this great big thing if you understand the concept of scoring and slipping. Okay. So adding elements, we've made slip, create elements as many as you want. You score the surface. I use a fork. You use slip, kind of works like a glue. Press it together nice and firm. You know, don't worry about it smooshing out because all that smooshed out clay just is giving you enough information to know that it is working, and then you clean up the joint area. Okay. So that's how you attach pieces of clay together and start to clean it up. And as you start to add more to it, you can develop your sculpture that way. So as you can see, working with clay can get pretty messy. Okay, I haven't been too careful with cleaning my area because honestly I'm doing all this in a pretty short amount of time. But here's what I'm going to suggest you do. Clean your tools. Okay, at very least get all the chunky stuff off of it. Now I know I gave you some dirty tools because I just didn't have time to clean them all. And they were kind of stuck in the back for a while. And I'll be honest with you, my own tools, I just scrape the big chunks off of it. Maybe it's not the best way to do it, but if you take a wood tool and you constantly put water on it, it disintegrates, it deteriorates. So in a weird sort of way, it prolongs the life of the tool not to wash it thoroughly. Yeah, some people would disagree with me. Okay, all the extra little pieces that you might cut off, like little shrapnels, again, make great slip. So you might even take your slip container and just dump it in there. Problem with that, of course, is that sometimes it just starts to become very clumpy. And the idea with slip is it should be smooth. Okay. For your piece, I highly recommend that even if you don't plan on doing too much more with it, still wrap it up. Okay. Now here's what happens. This is still pretty, how should I say, fragile. Okay. So you do want to take care with your piece. Okay. So I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to be very conscious that that can break off and I can bend it. So I'm being careful with it. I'm going to put that aside. Okay. Clean up my tools, as I said. Okay. If you have a piece of material that has stuff on it, you know, I like to fold it up, bring it over to the trash receptacle, and then of course, you know, dump out all the little shrapnels. For the slip, okay, if you have slip, I would try to take it all off of the brush. You can put the brush aside, you can wash it. If you have a slip that has a lid, awesome. You know, that's why, you know, this is really good. If your slip container does not have a lid, maybe just take some plastic or saran wrap and do it that way. It does take a while for slip to dry out, but you do want to try to keep it nice and fresh. Okay, put that aside. Make sure if you have a work area, if you don't have a mat, or even if you do, it's probably going to still become a mess. Clean up your area, all right? I take all the dry stuff, sweep it off, all right? Put that there, and then I take a sponge and maybe sponge off the surface area. Okay? You're going to want to keep it clean. Wet clay is pretty harmless. It's kind of messy. Dry clay can be a little bit tough on the throat if you inhale it, or the nose. So try to keep that at a minimum. Okay? Clean space is a happy space.